Okay, Patrick Johnson.
Hi.
Last week it was Minneapolis. This week it's Seattle.
Yeah.
I just look. We will get into everything coming up. We'll start off by thanking the good folks at Woody's RV. This, Woody'sRV.com is where you go for the Western Canada's largest selection of recreational vehicles. I know we've talked about this before. This would be a great trip to take a Woody's RV on down to
Yes.
Seattle. And I know you took the bus down today. That's in absence of you actually having an RV, but maybe we can hook you up. I'm a little sad that the first real meeting with Seattle, with the border being open, is a Thursday.
Yeah.
This would have been ideal to be a Saturday night game. I actually haven't seen any Canuck fans saying they're going down. I'm sure there'll be a few,
Yeah.
but again, we do these videos to have some longevity over the week. We'll get into the Canucks performance, but you've just been down in Seattle a few hours. Is there any buzz at all around the Kraken? I mean, it's quite the season for the Seahawks. They're just coming off this great blushing season for the Mariners. So, what's the hockey fever like in Seattle?
Well, it was. I had my first ever surprise at check-in. The guy actually knew who I was.
Celebrity.
And yeah, but we
So,
talked a bit.
Coos, they know who Coos is in
Yeah.
Minneapolis,
Yeah. True.
but you haven't
True.
reached that level of infamy yet.
But no, I asked him. I said, how are people into that? Are people into this? I mean, and he goes, yeah, and he actually goes, he was kind of surprised by it all, and because Seattle didn't have, obviously had some junior hockey. There'd been the Totems way back when, but well, not a major long-standing tradition of hockey, and certainly already a busy sports market. But yeah, I mean, I just went for a little walk before we had our chat here. I walked over into Belltown, and multiple places with signs in the windows, stuff on the walls saying, yeah, go Kraken, that kind of thing. So yeah, there is an energy here, and I know a few people that live down here and they really enjoyed going to games. They say the Kraken have done a really sort of hit a really nice sweet spot in terms of game presentation. Obviously the team hasn't been all that great, but just in terms of generating a buzz and connecting with some local fans, they've done a really nice job, I've been told.
Well, let's speak before we get into any specifics of the matchup with the Kraken. Let's just speak generally about the Canucks in the last 7 days since we last did a video. Still no wins.
Yeah.
Now, Patrick Alvin spoke to Coos. He'll have that story posted at our website by the time people watch this. It's a little puzzling to me, Patrick. Obviously, Buffalo are a much improved team. Carolina, one of the better teams in the NHL. You look at that road trip, they were up 3-0 on Edmonton in the first game.
Yeah.
Like this narrative never had to begin, but it did. Are the Canucks really one of the NHL's worst teams? I see this as a storyline that's been building upon itself because,
Right.
those first few games, you can argue that it was lucky bounces that took them out of the game. And if they get a couple of wins there, they're probably not in the situation right that they are right now. What's your sense of really what this Canucks team is?
I mean, some of it, sure, there is a process story here, absolutely. That there was a lot of things they were doing well, and that's something they themselves have pointed out. Um, but the repetitive nature at a certain point becomes a pattern, and it's been that inability to close the game out. Issues defensively. In a couple cases, I would say games where they needed the goalie to make a save. Um, last year, one of the criticisms we had was to have a chance, they needed their players to be playing at 100% in a given game. And I don't think that's necessarily been the story with a lot of the skaters, because obviously they've had a great performance already from Elias Pettersson. JT Miller's been, in comparison, absolutely terrible, and yet they've been in all these games. But yeah, the special teams have hurt them. The goaltending has not been as sharp as they need it to be. No, they're not an 0-5-2 team. But even then, you give them a couple wins, and they're still sort of on the bubble for being in the playoff chases, which essentially is what we thought they were. I think I said that they will make the playoffs, and at this point, they're going to have to play 100-some point pace over the rest of the season, which I don't think they've shown that they're anything close to that kind of team. But this is how things go, and I mean, some of the challenges is about sequence and the order that things happen, and those can throw you off, and that literally is what a losing streak is, obviously. So they have a lot of work to do. They're not as bad as the record is, but they're still. I'm not convinced they're as good as the record they're going to need to put together to get into the playoffs. I'm not sure they're that team either.
Well, okay, you're much more of a fancy stats guy than I am, former Canucks Army alum.
Yeah.
And one of the great new features we have this week. I'm, by the way, drinking Seattle Starbucks there in
No.
while you're in Seattle.
Top pot.
Oh, there you go, top pot. I thought it was looked like a Starbucks. Anyhow, you are Seattle. You're living it. You are a hipster, millennial, avocado toast eating youngster who's having trouble with the housing market. Whatever we want to tag people, there's a lot of similarities between the two cities. But no, let me get back on track here. My point was, you do this new feature every week, which we go where you're looking inside the numbers, and there's certainly much more to dig into now than there was last week. But when we talked last week, the Canucks numbers weren't terrible, and we'd looked at how special teams were maybe impacting those close games, especially as they were blowing leads. But now, with a couple more games to add to the sample size, they have the third worst goals against in the league, and they're only 25th in goals scored. So throw special teams out the window, all of a sudden their 5-on-5 play has been dragged back into the mire as well. So really, is this, you've talked about, players like Pettersson, who has had a good start, comparable to last year at least. What's happening with this team? How much of it is lack of confidence? How much of it is negative momentum? And how much of it is just the fact that after you get past those top couple of players, they're really not very talented?
Well, I think it's all those things, really. I mean, as I noted, I was at the game on Monday night, but as a fan, when my dad, it was a birthday gift, and ended up sitting in the end, an angle I don't get to see very often. And I mean, obviously, they were playing Carolina, who are one of the toughest, top teams in the league, super aggressive in how they play. But you could see the struggles the Canucks had breaking the puck out, and that was a statement that comes to the sort of depth question you're bringing up. Is that they have Quinn Hughes who can skate the puck out, but other defensemen. I mean, I think the book's still out on Jack Rathbone. We'll see, but the other group of defensemen they have, that's just not who they are, and that's not a good thing. And that's part of the problem. Why, as you noted, that the kind of, I mean, even if their special teams weren't playing, they've kind of stalled at even strength. I mean, they were scoring at a decent clip, but the whole league is scoring now, right? Like, that's the other thing, is like, don't get confused by them being some high powered team. They have a good offense, they're fine, but they're not league leading at this point. And that, again, coupled with the challenges in goal and the fact they haven't gotten any saves, and that the penalty kill was, especially in the first 10 days of the season going into last weekend, was so terrible. That just was not a formula for success. Early in the season, it's when you write a numbers thing, there's not a lot of trends really to dial in, because we haven't seen enough of them. But there were still things you can point to, and the fact that the fact that in the end their goals, as you just noted, I mean, they're now 25th in the league. Last week they were kind of middle of the pack. It wasn't like they were, like I said, it wasn't like they're blowing anybody out of the water. There are things here that we can see. We can see they're giving up too many goals. The simple measures, you don't even have to dig that deep to really understand what's going on so far. And you can watch the game and see the results. And like I said, they probably, I think they probably deserve a couple wins here, but it's not like they should be, 5-0-2 as opposed to 0-5-2.
This is kind of funny to me. I'll lift the curtain behind the business a little bit. I know what happens on a national level. You know, all of the national networks and national insiders will, they'll spend their 5 days covering the Leafs, and they'll be, oh shit, we're national, we have to do something somewhere else. And you try and find some sort of theme throughout the league. So the Canucks are drawn negative attention. I know Mike Trickos has a piece coming today about Jim Rutherford and how, there's going to be patience needed for him to implement his plan. I saw Mark Spector weighing in. There's a bunch of other people who are sort of taking the boots to the Canucks, because when you look around the league and you're looking for storylines, you go, oh, they're the only team who hasn't won a game yet, and you're going to come into some criticism. So even, Elliot Friedman, everyone takes what he says as gospel, and he tends to get, stuff given to him by people throughout the league. stuff coming about like, okay, well, if this continues, we're going to see a big trade. We could see a coaching change. These kind of things are going to, whether you call them distractions, whether they have any impact on the team or the players, or whether it's just fodder for the fans to kick about. Do you get the sense that, obviously, even as you pointed out, they could beat the Kraken, but then you lose to the Penguins at home the next night and you're plunged right back into crisis. Obviously, their first win will be a bit of an icebreaker, but do you get the sense that there could be something large happening with this team?
Well, I generally subscribe to the idea that I don't think a coaching change is imminent. Um, I think things have to go drastically south for that to happen. And even then, there's sort of the big picture question, who's available? What are you making the change for? They're obviously are still on the hook financially for Travis Green. They're paying Bruce Boudreau. Do you really want to be paying three coaches? So,
That has happened before. It
yes,
was
absolutely.
fairly recently. I think
Yeah.
was it AV, Willie, and Torts were all on the books
Yeah,
at one point, yeah.
exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. So, I mean, I'm
Which
sure,
maybe speaks to a bigger problem.
yeah, sure. Absolutely. And I was going to say, I'm sure ownership isn't a fan of paying that many people at once. That said, it's about getting your choices right the first time. Um, I don't get that sense. You know, Rutherford's been pretty open about this, that they tried to make some moves in the summer. It didn't work for whatever reason. Whether it was because they were asking too much, other teams didn't want to make a deal or otherwise, that didn't happen. And they've sort of they I mean, I don't think Rutherford could have been any more clear than he did on the weekend. He said we tried to make some changes. It didn't. That's the thing, though, is that like that's not an excuse in the end. I mean, these guys, nobody ever wants to make an excuse. It's like you have openly said you needed to change the makeup of this team. I have every reason to think that they are still interested in changing the makeup of this team. They had concerns about leadership at the end of the summer or at the end of the season. They had concerns about sort of the way the team plays and how it's set up. And other than adding, obviously added Ilya Mikheyev and Andrei Kuzmenko, which were sort of, I think, of an idea to add a little more offensive punch and build the forwards a little more than had been there and add some depth that just didn't exist internally. That's fine, but they still need, and everybody knows it, they still need to make a change on the blue line, and maybe their hams are strong. And that's what I wrote. I wrote in the skate on the weekend. I said, in many ways, they're kind of stuck on this course, and doubling down on JT Miller was, what's a choice. And to me, I'm still a bit surprised that it happened. I'm sure there, obviously, I have my theories on why it's happened, but I can't necessarily prove them. But in the end,
Is a pumpkin patch involved in that theory?
and unfortunately not. But no, in the end, this is a team that needs some kind of change. It is very much in that situation now where, like, it is, what's the different definition of crazy, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And the team was close. They played hard last year. I suppose there was a feeling from management that they deserve some credit for that, for finding their way. Perhaps there could be further growth, but to really take this team in a direction I think management wants to go, I think will require change. Now, whether they can get that done, whether they have the sort of the aggressive nature, whether they can find the right trading partners, whether there's too much of a hole for them to dig themselves out, not in terms of playing performance, but in terms of cap issues and contracts and that sort of thing, that remains to be seen. But I certainly believe there's a desire to make some change here.
Okay, so I think the JT Miller question is fascinating because as you look at the layers in terms of how it shapes where this team is and what it can do.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's a lot of joking online about Connor Bedard.
Yeah.
Now, if the team doesn't happen, I don't believe they're a bottom five team in the NHL. I do think at the end of the day, at the end of the season, they'll have more talent than to be like in with a legit shot for Bedard, although anything could happen. But when you look at where the rest of the roster is right now and what their assets are, um, when you talk about the team needing a change, leadership comes up, and then obviously there's a name like Bo Horvat out there. But this team, from where it is, it doesn't seem like amassing even a late first or second round picks are going to make a ton of difference at this point. It's more prospects and players that can help you now. If I look at what they have, Patrick, unless they completely reverse it and they burn it down to the ground, which I don't believe ownership has an appetite. So let me ask you this. If the issue is when you talk about change, you talk about leadership, you talk about movable assets, because let's face it, this market has feasted on Raymond Ballard and a third for over a decade now. It's literally JT Miller or Bo Horvat that you could move if you assume that that you're not going to touch Hughes or Pedersen. Is that a scenario you could see playing out? Either one of those guys being moved?
I mean, Patrick Allvin told us today he hasn't talked to Pat Morris, Bo Horvat's agent, in a number of weeks. I do imagine they're in a spot where, like, they basically said, this is what we think, and the other side said, well, this is what we think, and they're kind of at an impasse. Yeah, so I mean, from that standpoint, you don't want to lose Horvat for nothing. And when we hear talk about leadership, we can't help but wonder what that means about Bo Horvat. I mean, they're sort of, possibly speaking on both sides of their mouth. They're saying, well, we think Bo's important, he's part of our group, blah, 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 blah. But then you have discussions sort of nodding towards, well, there's concerns about how the room manages itself and sort of organizes itself going forward. Now, obviously, when they were winning, we weren't talking about these in quite the same terms. There was always sort of chatter about how well do these guys get along, yada, yada, yada.
None of that matters when you're winning, by the way.
Well, that's it, right? I mean, so of course Horvat could be a factor. I mean, from the moment they signed JT Miller, and from the moment that we asked Patrick Allvin about, have you set up a no trade or no movement clause for this season, because it doesn't kick in until his new contract starts. Patrick Allvin saying no, that we could have done that, but we didn't. That left open to speculation. Maybe they would be interested in moving him elsewhere. Maybe, that they're going to find, and a certain level, he's not playing very well. Teams aren't going to want to trade for him when he's not playing very well. But, if you're looking to shake things up, and, we saw obviously the Shen Miller dynamic on Saturday night, obviously, again, partly because they're losing and just not playing very well. But, I'm sure that is going to play into the discussion. I do wonder, obviously Brock Besser got hurt again, has had a sort of so-so start to the season. I mean, he's been involved, but hasn't scored, hasn't really looked like scoring. I think he hit the post once, but, I think he is very much the definition of the good dude. He's a good guy, and I think media-wise, we've always appreciated talking to him. But you do wonder about that. You wonder if that's a guy that maybe they'll change to move out, because all signs are I don't think management wants to move on from Niels Hoglander, and obviously he's lacked a bit in scoring touch, but he does so many other things well. But it's the kind of player you want in your lineup, and he's he's not terribly expensive either. And if this is a team that is trying to sort of have a long view, trying to win while they're winning right now, trying to take a long view and building something bigger, you do find yourself wondering if Besser's a piece that might be able to be flipped to another team, exchange for something a bit more efficient. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, like I said, I like I said before, like I don't think there's any reason to think this is a management group that is not interested in making changes, and certainly all those names that we've mentioned would be possibilities, I think.
Well, you've probably written this story about 10 times about them needing much more talent on the blue line.
Yeah.
It's been pointed out by everyone, and as you mentioned earlier, in fairness, it looks like they tried to do several things in the offseason that just didn't come about. Again, you're not going to, especially when you're not dealing from a position of strength. You talk about Besser. Probably after his first year, you would have thought, man, this guy could be a regular 50-goal scorer, or at least a 40-goal scorer, and there hasn't been. And then there could be, personal reasons, injury problems, all those reasons, but you're not dealing from a position of strength. Is there enough in this defense core to really make them competitive in the playoffs, or to get to the playoffs rather? Or is there just going to have to be some movement from outside? Like you're going to have to swap some of your top end talent on the forward line to solve that problem. Or, I'll be honest with you, Patrick, I thought the OEL and the Tyler Myers moves were terrible. They reeked of an owner who wanted a star name. When you look at the money, it's just killing them on the cap. But they're serviceable players. They absolutely are. but you're not going to be able to move those players. So I just look at the blue line and I go, we've been talking about this forever, and it's still the issue. And how do you fix it?
And that's, like I said, that's they kind of locked themselves in on this course. Uh, two of the big questions I had going into the season, and I wrote about this, was can Tyler Myers find, sort of rediscover some of his past offensive ability? And so far, no. I mean, he was all right. He had some moments, I think, against Carolina, but still isn't a guy that's, I don't know if he was ever a wheeler and dealer, but he was, a young athletic defenseman who could move the puck. And he's not that guy anymore. And even more so is Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who produced actually quite well despite not playing a ton on the power play last year, but was a power play performer. And the question wasn't necessarily he's never going to skate like he did when he was young, but could he find some of that? Now that it's another season in, he's with his new team, he's with a coach that I'm sure appreciates his younger talents, and certainly had a lot of success. You think about Bruce Boudreau and how things went with him he some of the defensemen he's had. You look at who he had in Washington, you look at who he had in Minnesota, you look at who he had in Anaheim, and he always had some really interesting young talented defensemen. Didn't necessarily ever have a sort of an older veteran the way Ekman-Larsson is, but certainly Ekman-Larsson, when he was young, was the kind of guy who would have thrived under Boudreau. And yet he just, it is striking to see the way he sort of defends. He is constantly positioning himself simply not to get beat. And it's tough to watch because it's a player that had so much ability and was never an issue for him. And now it's defense, the defensive zone. He doesn't get burned often. He got burned the other night, but he doesn't get burned often. But that's partly because he's playing a bit almost like a prevent defense. Like he's just trying to sort of say, well, don't beat me here, but I'll let you kind of give you that area. And that's a hard way to play. That's a hard way to survive. We saw that with Alex Edler in the later years. That was kind of he had to use his smarts. And if you're a guy like OEL and you were a guy that used to be able to skate the puck out and you can't anymore, well, that's a lot of money to pay for a guy that's starting to get more and more limited in his abilities. And certainly I think that's a guy the Canucks were interested in trying to see if they could find a new team for, but in the end it's on him, and he picked to be here and the Canucks traded for him, and he has every right to say that this is where he wants to stay. That is one of the dilemmas this team is facing. But to answer your main question, is there enough there? No, there's not. And obviously they're dealing with some injuries right now. They want to think that Travis Dermott can be a big contributor, but Travis Dermott was a third pairing defenseman in Toronto. The idea that he's somehow going to morph into a top four guy just because he's playing on a weaker team, that's not really the sign you want. You want to add to the top and push people down. You don't want to have guys coming in the bottom and rising above where they should be. And that's kind of where they're at. And, even from the bottom end, you look at the guys they've had to call up from Utica, Abbotsford. Guillaume Brisebois, who is the second longest tenured Canuck, bizarrely somehow, having played Baker's dozens of games in the NHL at this point.
Crash Davis.
Exactly. And there's a reason why he's never made it. He's just not good enough. And Noah Julesen's in the same basket. They're both guys that work hard and hustling and clearly still love the game because they wouldn't still be playing. But they're limited in their abilities, and they're now having to play essentially above where they're meant to be and playing regular minutes. And that's obviously a whole other discussion, but that plays the same issue. Is there anything here? No, there isn't. Maybe Jack Rathbone can figure it out and become a contributor, but that's a lot to ask of a player who hasn't played a ton since even before COVID, and obviously has some talents, but he's already almost 24, and it's kind of now or never for him. This is what the player is going to be, and the Canucks just, they need him to be a home run, and in the end, experience tells us he's probably not going to be.
You can go back to Mike Gillis and maybe understand the temptation to chip away at the future a little bit when the team was so close to winning something. And then you look at Jim Benning, and even now, Jim Rutherford, the deal that we did see to start the season, giving up a second-round pick. To me, it's what's really submarined this team over the last 6-7 years is you're not developing your Kevin BXs, which, not a first round pick, but damn, you get a great price. The more prospects you have, more chances, obviously, of one turning out to be solid guys who will get you through those moments. The state of the draft for the Canucks, when you look at the talent pool, and in particular on the blue line, I mean, is there anyone else within their scope that you could see being a significant help to them, if not this year, then next year on the blue line?
Not really. I mean, there's guys like Jonathan Meyerberg and Hugo Gabrielson, and some of these late round picks that they've got, say, from Sweden. But you're in the end, you're right. Like Kevin Bieksa was as good a pick as you can find, in that range. But the reality is you find NHL players throughout the draft. Like there's no doubt about it. Like this is the thing that happened when I was sort of going on a little bit about when they traded for Riley Stillman and they gave up a second round pick. And people are like, and I'm like, guys, Riley Stillman was picked 2016 in the fourth or fifth round, but 24 of the 31 picks in the because I think that was the first year Vegas picked of the 30 picks anyway. Only 7 guys in the second round haven't played a game in the NHL, right? Like from round 1, 2, and 3, almost every draft now, almost every one of those guys plays the NHL. Now, obviously, not all of them become regulars, but the point is that at that end of the draft, you're going to find quality players. And the simple truth is that since basically trading for JT Miller, trading their 2020 pick for JT Miller, not picking in first round again in 2021 because they picked Oliver Ekman-Larsson, giving away second round picks here and there. It has been a very difficult path for the Canucks to develop players into their team from within, which is inherently the least sort of costly, least expensive, most efficient, I should say, way to add players to your lineup. And that comes back to your question: is that if you keep moving guys out, it just I mean, we still don't know if Tyler Madden's really going to become an NHLer, but Tyler Madden was an example of a player that they gave up pretty quickly. Jim Benning's regime gave up pretty quickly just to get Tyler Toffoli, and then the fact they didn't re-sign Tyler Toffoli just made it all the worse. And just burning through young players when you can least afford to, especially when you're not picking every round, and that also became the other thing. So it's a really tough spot the Canucks are in. Obviously, they've been trying to be smart and be creative in some of their picks. And on the whole, most people felt that like their draft this year was pretty solid. It wasn't amazing. People have raised their eyebrows about sort of like Damon Gardner and players like that. But on the whole, it was decent. But they still most of those guys are not going to make it. Like that's the thing, and so that's why you want more, more young prospects, or as many young prospects as you can get your hands on. And like that's you look at how many picks the Montreal Canadiens had. Obviously, they're not going to have a great season this year, but they're certainly hopeful that a bunch of those players work out, and that a couple of years from now they'll have a hot, exciting young team, and you'll feel like there's a forward direction here as opposed to what we've seen in the last decade, which has just been constantly trying to recreate this wheel that is starting to come apart. And they made as I noted, since 2013, when Mike Gillis went to the ownership and said, I think we need to rebuild, we need to start moving out all our top players, and we can reset this and we'll be competitive again in a couple of 3 seasons. There have been they played 8 seasons, they made the playoffs twice, they've had 4 coaches. And
thank you, Jim.
Yeah, exactly. And like in the end, that the whole notion of what Jim Benning was supposed to bring to the table didn't work out either, because they kept trading all their guys away. And now here you are trying to hope that obviously they've got they do legitimately have good, solid group of young players to build around, like Pettersson, Hughes, Demko. Those are all great guys to have. Podkolzin, I think, going to start pushing into that mix. Like these are guys you want to have, but the thing is how you work around it and all the stuff you do around it. You've already mentioned the OEL thing and Myers, who is, he's been serviceable enough for him, but not the value that they signed him for. In the end, it's just been misfire after misfire after misfire, and now you're this spot where it's like, can you find a way to sort of reload and reset and have another go at it smartly? And I mean, the jury's still out on whether this new management group will be able to do that.
Who's been their best player?
I think it's Pettersson. He I think he struggled a little
Don't
bit
tell
last
Mark
game,
Spector.
yeah, I know. And you know, I mean, I thought it was unfair of Mark to pick on one play. You know, he wasn't wrong. You're right. I mean, it was a big moment. You need your big players to be great in big moments, but Pettersson's been great in all these other moments, and he's been creating stuff. He's been scoring goals. His line has been one of the few
Been good in his own end too.
Yeah, really good in their own, and partly because they don't have to play there very much because they're in the offensive zone all the time. So, you know, he's been a very, very good player, and you know, I mean, again, I mean, I had a really nice chat with Brock Besser about it, and I asked him a little about it. I mean, Pettersson is, you know, Pettersson's one of his good friends, and he said, you know, he wants to be a leader. He wants to be that guy for us, the guy that is just going to go and get it done. And you know, the Canucks have been fortunate because Bo Horvat's often been that guy too. He's a guy that will get you those goals. Not as talented and a few more flaws than Pettersson, but you know, the Canucks have been fortunate to have guys like that. The problem in the end is that, you know, too often they have to kind of chase the game, and not often enough have they led the way. And I'm sure that eats at Pettersson. He's a guy that he's used to having been on top, and obviously since he's made the NHL, the Canucks have mostly not.
Who's been their worst player?
Ooh, I think it's JT Miller. It has been. I mean, he honestly
Leading question.
Yeah, right. Honestly, he like he hasn't been any different defensively than he's been in the past. He's not. You know, I think everybody knows he's got some defensive issues. The thing that's astounded me the most is how lost he's looked on offense. He's had trouble collecting the puck. We haven't seen. I mean, he's scored 4 goals. That's the crazy thing in all this. You know, obviously we know the shots there, but we haven't seen him. You know, think about the goals. You know, he did this multiple times last year when he winds up in his own end and is able to skate end to end and score these really exciting, fun goals. We haven't seen any plays like that. We haven't seen those sort of precision, long distance passes that he's so good at. We just haven't seen anything like that. And the numbers show it. The Canucks' on ice, their Corsi, their shot attempts when he is on the ice is like 60% of what it was last year. And some of that maybe is how teams are checking out, but I think a lot of it's just him. He's fighting the puck, and it's just, you know, when he's not scoring, it's not good, and you need him to be a scoring player, and he just hasn't been enough of that.
Okay, we'll wrap it up quickly here, but in the next, going say Thursday to Thursday, you got the Kraken on the road,
Yep.
and then you've got Pittsburgh at home, and then you've got New Jersey and Anaheim at home. How many wins do the Canucks have this time next week?
2.
Okay, not bad. 500 is progress.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
all right. Well,
they've obviously got to pick their socks up if, you know, beyond that, if they're gonna.
if they
do
don't
anything,
have at
but
least 2 wins at this time next week, I think we'll be talking about some sort of major
ooh,
event happening, because
I've got to think so.
yeah, you can't start getting into Bill LaForge territory, pride, hustle, and desire. Your PhD, that failed
Yeah.
experiment, 20 games without a win, and that was the end of that. So
I'll say one more thing. I mean, I've thought a lot more about the sort of marker that Bruce Boudreau laid out for us when he said he talked to his team about how bad the start for his Ducks was in 2015-16. You know, they won once in the first month, so, and then they won the division. Now, I don't think his team is as good as that one, or at least not defensively sound as that one. This one might have a little more.
the division's not too bad either.
Yeah, that's the other thing. So in the end, but I did find it interesting that he brought that up, because it's clear, you know, he said he's talked to his team about it, but it's clearly, I almost found myself wondering, is this an argument he's had with management, saying, guys, listen, I had a bad time before, give me a chance there. And management's basically said, yeah, this is Bruce's chance to work his way through his team. So yeah. Like I said, I'm not sure he's going anywhere. You know, the month ends next week. I guess we'll see at that point what else happens if things are still circling the drain.
Well, thanks again to Woody's RV for being our sponsor. We definitely, for the next Seattle road trip, we have to maybe see if that's something we can pull off. So woodysrv.com if you're looking for Western Canada's best selection of RVs. Patrick, enjoy Seattle. Maybe check out the Old Stove Brewery down one of the new additions down by Pike Place Market overlooking the water. As long as it's not crawling with Blue Jays fans as it was when I was there in July, it'll be a good time.
All right.